It was 2001. I was attending a neighborhood potluck at the local park with my wife and our newborn son. Our friends were elated upon learning we'd had our first, and would be meeting Ashton for the first time that day. Everyone fussed over him and the adorable circular birthmark beneath his left eye, debating which of us he looked more like, and how excited their kids were to have a new friend. There were about a dozen of us that occupied 3 picnic tables. We had 3 or 4 coolers, a whole spread of different platters and trays that covered an entire table, along with burgers and dogs cooking on 2 charcoal grills. My cross-street neighbor, Fred, grilled, while everyone else talked, drank, and played games. Ashton lay in his carriage, which I parked in the shade of an oak tree next to the grills. I kept Fred company while he cooked, acting as a sort of sous chef and making sure his drink was always full. The park was particularly busy, and despite everything going on, I spotted someone who appeared to be watching our group, sitting alone at a picnic table about 10 yards from our spot. His clothes were sketchy, black pants and a heavy-looking hoodie that obscured his face. They were so uncharacteristic for a midday barbecue and made him very noticeable. The hooded man sat facing us with his arms folded across the table. I pointed him out to Fred, who acknowledged that something seemed off, but thought he appeared harmless. "Maybe he's meeting someone," I suggested, while pouring Fred a beer. Without any discretion, Fred turned and stared directly at the man. "Could be," Fred said, with disinterest, while flipping a few burgers. "Maybe he got stood up. We'll fix him a plate and make him feel a little better." I rolled my eyes at Fred's remark, unable to resonate with his unapologetic apathy. I couldn't ignore my instincts that were telling me this guy was here for another reason. Nobody else seemed to notice or mind him, and I didn't want to put a damper on the gathering, so I kept quiet about my apprehension. Despite being unable to see much of his face, I definitely felt the man's looming gaze briefly lock onto mine for a few minutes. After convincing myself he didn't have any good intentions, I decided to confront this particular individual. "Let me see what's up with this guy," I said softly to Fred. "It's those newfound parental instincts kicking in," Fred said. "They get a little wonky at first, just FYI. I started towards the man's table, but froze upon hearing an ear-splitting crack, a booming of shattering glass, and a crunching of metal. Everyone in the park stopped and stared at the parking lot, where a large tree limb had broken and smashed 2 cars. "The hell!" Fred exclaimed, as he set his spatula down and raced towards the scene. The tree limb had fallen onto Fred's car, which mine was parked next to, and partly covered by the massive branches. Throwing my arms up in the air, I released a "what the hell" of my own and followed behind Fred. Rachel was already assessing our cars when I arrived, shuddering upon spotting a few good-sized scratches and dents and a windshield crack. I expected Rachel to be as equally upset. Instead, she gave me a perplexed stare. "Where's the baby?" she quickly asked. I immediately pivoted, instantly noticing the hooded man had left his table and was beelining towards the grill. I broke into an all-out sprint upon determining the hooded man was after Ashton, releasing a boisterous "Hey!" that I hoped would deter him and get others' attention. What happened next took a matter of seconds, but felt like it unraveled in slow motion. The hooded man, wearing thick padded gloves, removed one of the grill's metal grates and grabbed its side handles. He turned to me once more before lifting the grill and dumping the red-hot coals into the carriage. A loud, hiss-like sizzle mixed with my baby's shrill, blood-curdling shriek, his screams only lasting 2 or 3 seconds before the carriage burst into flames. Grabbing handfuls of my hair, I reached Ashton's carriage. I could only scream his name and instantly knocked the stroller over with a firm kick. Glowing coals charred the blankets and pillows, and Ashton's smoldering remains spilled out, most of which were still on fire. The hooded man took off across the field while being pursued by Fred and 2 others. I could instantly tell that my baby was dead, whose stiff, crumpled form was completely doused in flames and produced a burnt, meaty aroma that filled my nostrils. I heard my wife's hysterical screams behind me, and I felt my legs give out as I collapsed in a heap. Rachel was inconsolable. She had to be sedated by the paramedics. I faded in and out, with most of time being between witnessing Ashton's murder and being taken to the hospital. It all felt like a blur. While waiting for an update on my wife, an officer came up to me and said they had caught the hooded man who initially escaped the park. I was brought to the police station, where I first laid eyes on him through a one-way mirror. He sat in an interrogation room. The man's appearance was grotesque, and he had appalling physical deformities. His skin was a light pinkish beige and littered with veiny, blotchy gray and black growths. He was completely hairless and had dark yellow eyes, whose right one was about twice the size of his left. I was met with repulsion and a boiling fury while gazing upon this murderous subhuman life form, whose windpipe I yearned to crush with my bare hand. After confirming I did not recognize him, detectives told me that he was being classified as a John Doe. The hooded man had no form of identification, wasn't showing up on any of the databases, and hadn't spoken a word. After getting assured that he wouldn't be released anytime soon, they asked a few more questions before letting me go, promising to provide updates on new developments. I returned to the hospital, where Rachel was still being treated for severe mental breakdown. I spent the night in the waiting room, mostly with my face buried in my cupped hands, replaying the day's grisly, life-altering events in my head. At some point I dozed off, and was awoken the next morning by a nurse. She brought me to the doctor caring for Rachel, who said my wife was in a deep state of catatonia. After being updated on Rachel's condition, I returned home to start arranging Ashton's services. No sooner than taking 3 steps out of the hospital, however, I was stopped by the same officer who'd brought me to the police station yesterday. He looked distraught, and I could tell he was dreading what he was about to tell me. "He's gone," the officer said sorrowfully. "Who's gone?" I asked with bewilderment. "The man who killed your baby. He somehow escaped last night. No witnesses, nothing on the camera, no sign of how. He was in his cell one minute and just gone the next." The hooded man was never found. Rachel made little progress overcoming her debilitating trauma, spending the next year in and out of psychiatric care. My life consisted of work, visiting her at the hospital, and going to bed. 2 months passed, during which things continued to gradually implode. Rachel returned home, but was on a cocktail of meds that barely seemed to help. She became a bitter, hostile shell of her former self, barely capable of functioning independently, and prone to sporadic fits of rage, delirium, or emotional episodes. Rachel blamed me for our baby's death, and made it her mission to keep me constantly reminded. I reached my breaking point with Rachel when she used a broken bottle to attack me during one of her episodes, slicing my arm and neck, which required over a dozen stitches. After that, Rachel was put into the mental care facility, and I decided to explore my legal options for ending our marriage. She could be looked after by her family, I thought. Most of them also hated and blamed me for Ashton's death anyway, even saying I was responsible for Rachel's mental breakdown. My boss's wife connected me with a divorce attorney to look at my case. When I met him at his office, however, he said something that took me completely off guard. "I've actually been expecting you, Mr. Williard," the attorney said while rummaging through his desk. "I have something here with instructions that I'm to give you on the 1st of September, which is today." He slid a yellow manila envelope in front of me, which had my name in large black letters. Inside was a light gray envelope that also had my name handwritten on it in red ink. "Who did it come from?" I asked awkwardly. "I only spoke to him twice. 1 year ago when he initially called, and then last night when he reminded me about today. He just identified himself as Mr. Doe. Sent me a large wad of cash to hold this for him, and that was that. Didn't ask any questions. That's sometimes how it goes in my business." The envelope's letter contained a vertical list of numbers, with other sets of digits, words, or letters beneath each one. The manila envelope held a white CD with "Watch in Order" written across its surface. I didn't even accomplish what I had come there to do originally, becoming completely sidetracked by this mysterious package. I ran the CD on my computer, which had a handful of video files labeled 1 through 5, remembering the disc said, "Watch in order." I opened the first file, and my heart stopped when the video began playing. Appearing on the screen was the deformed face of my baby's killer. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you haven't already, I always suggest hit that subscribe button, maybe go ahead and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stories that we do here. I've got a link below to my latest book if you'd like to pick up your own copy. Follow the link below down to Amazon, and if you'd prefer a signed one, get up with me. I'm sure we can work something out. If you'd like to support the show in a more monetary way, might I suggest heading on down to Patreon. We have several tiers. I'm sure you'll find something that'll suit you. I always recommend my $10 tier, which is my Ghostly Reader tier. You get a signed copy of my book on your doorstep anytime I write one, which is, on average, about twice a year. Speaking of my awesome patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.